In the winter of 1847, the most powerful man in Yorkshire, a recluse known only as the Iron Duke, found a woman frozen half to death at his iron gates. History tells us she was just a nurse. But the private letters found in the Ashbourne archives reveal a scandal that the Crown tried to bury. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of a conspiracy, a forbidden passion, and a betrayal that would nearly destroy two ancient bloodlines. Who was she really? And why was she running? This is the true, untold story of the Duke and the nurse who melted his frozen heart. The wind howling across the Yorkshire moors on the night of December 14th, 1847, was not merely cold, it was predatory. It hunted for gaps in the stonework of Ashbourne Manor, whistling through the chimneys like a dying choir. Inside the library, Silas Harrington, the 9th Duke of Ashbourne, sat before a dying fire. At 32, Silas was a man etched in granite, hard, unyielding, and largely silent. The local villagers in the hamlet of Oakhaven whispered that the Duke had ice in his veins, a rumor cemented by his refusal to marry and his brooding isolation following the suspicious death of his father 5 years prior. Silas swirled the amber liquid in his crystal tumbler, staring at the portrait of his ancestor, General Thomas Harrington. He was tired. Not the fatigue of a long day, but the bone-deep exhaustion of a man guarding too many secrets. "Your Grace," the voice of Mr. Pumblechook, his aging and arthritic butler, cracked the silence. Silas didn't turn. "I told you, Pumblechook. No visitors. Not even the vicar. It isn't a visitor, sir. It's something at the east gate." Silas set the glass down with a sharp clink. The east gate was the furthest entrance, bordering the treacherous wooded pass that led toward the industrial smog of Leeds. It had been barred for years. "The dogs are unsettled, sir," Pumblechook added, his hands trembling slightly. Jameson went to check the latches and found a bundle. Silas grabbed his heavy wool coat and strode out into the biting hall, grabbing a lantern. He ignored the protests of the staff. He was a man who handled his own problems. The trek to the gate was brutal. The snow was already calf-deep. When the iron bars of the east gate loomed out of the darkness, illuminated by the swaying lantern light, Silas saw it. It wasn't a bundle. It was a body. A woman lay crumpled against the cold iron, her fingers curled around the metal bars as if she had been trying to shake them before consciousness failed her. She wore no heavy cloak, only a thin grey linen dress, the uniform of a working woman, perhaps a maid or a hospital worker, stained with mud and stiff with frost. "Open it," Silas roared over the wind to Jameson, the groundskeeper. As the gate groaned open, Silas dropped to his knees in the snow. He pulled the woman into his arms. She was light, alarmingly so, her skin the color of blue-veined marble. Her hair, escaped from a modest cap, was a dark, matted wet mess against his chest. "She's gone, Your Grace," Jameson shouted, shielding his eyes from the sleet. Frozen solid, Silas placed a hand on her neck. His rough fingers pressed against skin that felt like the stone of his manor walls. But then a flutter. Veined. Irregular. a defiance of death. She is alive, Silas growled. He scooped her up, ignoring the strain in his shoulders. Prepare the blue room. Get Mrs. Gable. And send a rider for Dr. Alcott. Now, as he carried her back toward the manor, the woman's head lolled against his shoulder. A small, brass object fell from her pocket into the snow. Silas paused, balancing her weight, and snatched it up. It was a nurse's pin. Silver, tarnished, engraved with the insignia of St. Jude's Infirmary, London. And on the back, scratched hastily with a knife, "Run." Silas looked down at the pale face. Who was she? And what kind of hell breaks a woman so thoroughly that she would choose the freezing moors over the safety of the city? He tightened his grip. Not tonight, he whispered into the storm. You don't die tonight. For 3 days, the stranger hovered in the grey mist between worlds. The manor, usually a tomb of silence, was alive with hushed urgency. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, a stern woman with a heart as soft as rising dough, changed the hot bricks in the bed every hour. Silas found himself unable to return to his study. He paced the corridor outside the blue room, the brass pin burning a hole in his pocket. He had sent inquiries to London regarding St. Jude's Infirmary, but the snow had blocked the roads. They were trapped. On the morning of the 4th day, the fever broke. Silas was sitting in the armchair in the corner of the room, ostensibly reading a ledger, but watching her chest rise and fall. Her eyes opened. They were not the soft blue or brown he expected. They were grey, storm cloud grey, sharp and lucid. She didn't scream. She didn't cry out. She instantly scanned the room, the velvet drapes, the roaring fire, the Duke watching her. Her hand went to her throat, then to her pocket. Panic flared in her eyes. It's safe, Silas said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. He stood up, towering over the bed. You are at Ashbourne Manor. I am the Duke of Ashbourne. The woman pushed herself up, wincing as her stiff muscles protested. The pin, she rasped. Her voice was wrecked by the cold. Where is my pin? Silas reached into his vest and produced the tarnished silver badge. He held it out but didn't release it when she reached for it. St. Jude's, Silas said. London. That is 200 miles away. You walked, I took a coach. Part of the way, she lied. He could tell she was lying. Her eyes flicked to the door. I was dismissed. I have family in Scotland. You were heading north, Silas noted. But you were at my east gate. That is not the road to Scotland. That is the road to nowhere. She snatched the pin from his hand, clutching it like a weapon. I lost my way. Thank you for your hospitality, your grace. I must leave. She threw back the heavy quilt and tried to stand. Her legs buckled instantly. Silas caught her before she hit the floor, his hands gripping her waist. The contact sent a jolt through him, heat, sudden and alarming. She was trembling, not from cold, but from adrenaline. You are going nowhere, Silas said, placing her back onto the bed with firm gentleness. Dr. Alcott says your lungs are compromised. If you step outside, you will be dead within the hour. Better dead than found, she muttered, almost inaudibly. Silas leaned in, his face inches from hers. Found by whom? Who is chasing you, miss? She hesitated. She looked at the door, then back at the Duke. She saw the hardness in his jaw, but also the strange, intense curiosity in his eyes. Isabel, she whispered. Isabel Calloway. Well, Miss Calloway, Silas said, straightening his coat. The roads are blocked by 10 feet of snow. No one is coming in, and no one is going out. You are safe here. But when the snow melts, you will tell me the truth about why a London nurse has run carved into her badge. Isabel sank back into the pillows, pulling the sheets up to her chin. She looked small, fragile, yet her jaw was set with a stubbornness that matched his own. And if I don't, she challenged, then I will assume you are a danger to my household, Silas replied coolly. And I deal with dangers permanently. He turned to leave. Wait, Isabel called out. Silas paused at the door. The man who is looking for me, she said, her voice shaking. He isn't just a man. He is Lord Harrington. Your cousin, Silas froze. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He turned slowly, his face a mask of terrifying calm. My cousin Frederick, Silas asked quietly. The man who is currently trying to declare me insane so he can inherit this estate. Isabel nodded slowly. He didn't just dismiss me, Your Grace. He tried to kill me. Because I know what he did to the patients in Ward 4. And I know what he plans to do to you. The twist hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Silas looked at the freezing nurse, really looked at her, and realized that fate hadn't just brought him astray. It had brought him a weapon. Or perhaps his salvation. The revelation that his cousin Frederick, a man Silas had long suspected of treachery, was involved changed everything. The dynamic shifted from rescuer and victim to reluctant allies in a besieged fortress. Over the next week, as the blizzard raged outside, burying the ground floor windows in white life, inside Ashbourne Manor fell into a strange, domestic rhythm. Isabel Calloway was not a typical guest. As her strength returned, she refused to stay in bed. She began to help. When the scullery maid burned her hand, Isabel dressed it with a professional efficiency that left Mrs. Gable stunned. When Pumblechook's arthritis flared in the damp cold, she brewed a willowbark tea that eased his pain. She was useful. Silas liked useful. But the tension between them was electric. They met every evening in the library. Silas would sit at his desk, reviewing estate papers, while Isabel sat by the fire, mending linens she had requested from the housekeeper to earn her keep. Tell me about Ward 4, Silas demanded one evening, pouring 2 glasses of wine. He slid one across the mahogany desk toward her. Isabel didn't touch the wine. She stared into the fire. St. Jude's was a charity hospital. Frederick Lord Harrington sat on the board of directors. He funded a new wing. Ward 4. It was supposed to be for the incurable. tuberculosis, cholera recovery, but the patients weren't recovering. They were disappearing, Isabel said, her voice dropping. I was the night matron. I started noticing the discrepancies in the logs. Men would come in with a broken leg and die of heart failure 2 days later. Their bodies were never released to families. They were sent to the Royal College for dissection. Sealers narrowed his eyes. Body snatching is illegal, but hardly a capital offense for a lord. It wasn't just bodies, Your Grace. Isabel looked up, her grey eyes haunting. They were testing things. Tinctures. Poisons. Frederick wasn't just selling corpses. He was selling results to chemists who wanted to test lethal doses. I found his ledger. The black ledger. Do you have it? Sealers stood up. I did, Isabel said. I stole it. That's why I ran. But his men, they caught me at the train station in Leeds. I managed to slip away into the crowd, but I dropped my bag. I lost the ledger. Sealers slammed his hand on the desk. Without the ledger, it's your word against a peer of the realm. You are a nurse. He is a Harrington. They will hang you for slander. I know, Isabel snapped, standing up to face him. That is why I came here. I didn't stumble upon your gate by accident, Sealers. It was the first time she had used his Christian name. The sound of it shocked them both into silence. I came, she continued, breathless, because I remembered something from the ledger. The last entry. It wasn't a patient. It was a purchase order for arsenic trioxide. And the delivery address wasn't the hospital. She took a step closer to him. It was Ashbourne Manor. Sealers felt the blood drain from his face. He thought of his evening tonic, prepared by his valet. He thought of the strange fatigue he had felt for months, the headaches, the metallic taste in his mouth. He isn't trying to declare you insane, Isabel whispered. He is poisoning you. Slowly. Mimicking a wasting disease so the inheritance passes without question. Sealers looked at the glass of whiskey on his desk. He looked at Isabel. Proof, Sealers demanded hoarsely. I need proof. Let me draw your blood, Isabel said. I have my kit. I can do a Marsh test. It's crude, but it will show if there is metal in your system. Sealers hesitated. To let her do this was to admit vulnerability. It was to let her touch him, hurt him, save him. He rolled up his sleeve. Do it. The procedure was done by candlelight. Isabel's hands were cool and steady as she tied a tourniquet around his muscular forearm. She worked with a focus that Sealers found mesmerizing. As she cleaned the puncture site, her fingers lingered on his skin for a fraction of a second too long. Their eyes met. In the quiet of the library, with the wind howling outside, the distance between Duke and nurse vanished. He saw a woman of immense courage. She saw a man who was not a monster, but a fortress under siege. There, she whispered, capping the vial. We wait until morning for the reaction. Isabel, Sealers said. Yes, Your Grace, if you are right. I will burn the world down to keep you safe. She swallowed hard. And if I am wrong, then I am just a lonely man dying of natural causes, he said with a wry, dark smile. The moment was shattered by a pounding at the front door. Not the wind. Heavy iron fists. The dogs in the kennel began to bark viciously. Silas moved to the window. Through the swirling snow, he saw torches. A carriage, black and sleek, with the crest of the Harrington family on the door, had forced its way up the drive behind a team of 6 exhausted horses. "He's here," Silas said, his voice turning to ice. Isabel gasped, clutching the vial of blood to her chest. "Go to the servants' quarters," Silas commanded, grabbing a pistol from his desk drawer. "Hide in the linen closet. Do not come out until I say, 'Silas, go.'" As Isabel fled the room, Silas checked the prime on his pistol. He walked into the grand hall just as the heavy oak doors were thrown open. In stepped Lord Frederick Harrington, shaking snow from a fur-lined cloak. He was handsome in a reptilian way, smiling with too many teeth. Behind him stood 2 large men who looked more like prize-fighters than footmen. "Cousin," Frederick boomed, his voice echoing in the stone hall. "My God, it is brisk. I was worried about your health in this storm, Silas. I brought my own physician to check on you." Silas stood at the top of the stairs, the pistol hidden behind his back. "You are trespassing, Frederick. Nonsense." "Family is never trespassing," Frederick sneered. He looked around the hall, his eyes sniffing the air like a hound. "Besides, we are looking for a thief. A dangerous, delirious woman who escaped St. Jude S. We tracked her prints to your gate. Surely you haven't seen her." Silas descended the stairs, one slow step at a time. "I have seen no one," Silas lied smoothly. Frederick's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went cold. He pulled a grey linen scarf from his pocket, Isabel's scarf. "Strange," Frederick said, holding it up. "Because my man found this on your doorstep." "She is here, Silas. Give her to me. She is sick. She imagines conspiracies. Get out of my house." Silas raised the pistol, aiming it directly at Frederick's chest. Frederick laughed. "You won't shoot me, cousin. You don't have the stomach for scandal." He snapped his fingers. "Search the house. Find the girl. And if the Duke resists, well, he is known to be mentally unstable. A tragic accident might occur." The 2 thugs stepped forward. The war for Ashbourne Manor had begun. The standoff in the great hall of Ashbourne Manor vibrated with a tension that was almost audible, a high-pitched whine that existed just beneath the roar of the wind outside. Silas Harrington stood his ground, the heavy pistol steady in his hand, aimed squarely at the center of his cousin's chest. "One more step," Silas warned, his voice low and devoid of humanity. "And the peerage will be mourning a Harrington by morning." Frederick's smile faltered, replaced by a sneer of genuine annoyance. He signaled to the 2 thugs flanking him. "Do not kill him, but break his arm. He needs to learn that the mad are not fit to rule." The first thug, a brute with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, lunged. Silas didn't fire. He knew a gunshot would bring the rest of Frederick's entourage, who were surely waiting by the carriages, storming in. Instead, he fired into the heavy crystal chandelier above them. The gunshot was deafening in the stone hall. The chains shattered. With a sound like a collapsing glacier, the massive fixture crashed down between them, exploding into 1,000 shards of glass and twisted brass. Now Silas roared, not to the men, but to himself. He spun around, bolting not for the stairs, but for the tapestry hanging to the left of the fireplace. He tore it aside, revealing a panel of dark oak that looked identical to the wall. He pressed a knot in the wood, and the panel clicked open. "Get him," Frederick screamed from the other side of the wreckage, coughing in the cloud of plaster dust. Silas slipped into the darkness of the passage, slamming the panel shut just as a heavy shoulder rammed against it from the other side. He threw the iron bolt, sealing them out. He was in the veins, the network of servant passages and priest holes built into Ashbourne Manor during the religious persecutions of the 16th century. It was a labyrinth of dust, cobwebs, and cold draughts, known only to the master of the house. "Isabel," he hissed into the gloom. "I'm here," her voice came from the shadows ahead. She stepped into the sliver of light, leaking from a crack in the masonry. She was trembling, clutching the vial of his blood like a holy relic. She had not gone to the linen closet as ordered. She had found the entrance to the passage on the upper landing, anticipating his move. She was smarter than he gave her credit for. "They will tear the house apart," Silas said, grabbing her hand. His grip was iron hard. "We have to move. The walls are thick, but sound travels." They ran through the narrow corridors, the air thick with the smell of centuries-old dust and dry rot. Silas led her down a spiraling stone staircase that seemed to descend into the very bowels of the earth. "Where are we going?" Isabel whispered, struggling to keep up with his long strides. "The old wine cellar," Silas replied. "It has the only door they won't think to check, and it has the equipment we need." "Equipment? My father," Silas said grimly, "was an amateur chemist before he died. He had a laboratory set up behind the vintage reserves. If you are to test this blood, we do it there." They reached the bottom. Silas pushed open a heavy, creaking door. The room beyond was freezing, filled with the ghostly shapes of covered furniture and rows of dusty bottles. In the center stood a long workbench covered in beakers, retorts, and burners that hadn't been lit in years. Silas barricaded the door with a heavy oak cask. He turned to Isabel. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold reality of their situation. They were trapped in his own home, hunted by his own blood. "Do you know how to use these?" Silas gestured to the dusty apparatus. Isabel set the vial down. She looked at the burners, the zinc, the acid. She nodded. "I watched the doctors at St. Jude's. The Marsh test is simple. We mix your blood with acid and zinc. If there is arsenic, it will produce a gas. We heat the gas and it leaves a metallic mirror on the glass." "Do it," Silas said. He moved to the far wall, checking a rack of old hunting rifles. Most were rusted, useless. He found a jar of gunpowder and a flask of oil. He began to fashion crude explosives. As Isabel worked, the silence of the cellar stretched between them. She lit a small burner, the blue flame the only light in the cavernous room. She moved with a precision that betrayed her training, measuring the acid, adding the zinc. The mixture began to bubble. "Why did you become a nurse?" Silas asked. Suddenly, his back to her, as he packed gunpowder into a small tin. Isabel paused. "My father was a doctor in the army. He died in India. We were left with nothing. Nursing was a respectful service. It was either that or a governess, and I have never been good at embroidery. You seem good at survival," Silas noted. "One learns to be when the world decides you are disposable," she replied quietly. She looked at him, his broad back hunched over the workbench. "Why did you let everyone believe you were mad, Silas?" "The rumors." "The isolation." Silas stopped working. He turned to face her. The shadows played across his sharp features, softening the harsh lines of his face. "Because it was safer," he admitted. "After my father died, I found his journals. He suspected he was being poisoned too, but he couldn't prove it. He became paranoid. He trusted no one. I thought if I played the hermit, if I shut the gates, the vipers would lose interest. I didn't realize the vipers were already inside." He walked over to her, standing just behind her shoulder as she watched the glass tube. "I was wrong," he murmured, his voice rough. "I thought solitude was strength. But it was just a slow death." He was close enough that she could smell the scent of sandalwood, gunpowder, and the cold winter air clinging to his coat. Isabel felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. In the dim light, the Duke of Ashbourne wasn't a mythical beast. He was a man, terrified and angry, fighting for his life. "Look," she whispered. Silas leaned in. Inside the heated glass tube, a silvery black deposit was forming. It coated the interior of the glass like a dark mirror. "Arsenic," Isabel breathed. "A lethal amount. If you had taken another dose, your heart would have stopped tonight." Silas stared at the silver stain. It was the physical manifestation of his cousin's hatred. It was proof. "He has been poisoning me for months," Silas said, his voice cold with fury. "Through the food. The wine, the tonic," Isabel said, realization dawning on her. "You said you take a nightly tonic." "Who prepares it?" "My valet," Silas said. "Jameson," the name hung in the air. Jameson, the man who had found Isabel at the gate. The man who had served Silas for 10 years. "Jameson is the only one with the key to the medicine cabinet," Silas said, his face hardening into a mask of rage. "He isn't just a servant. He is Frederick's creature." A heavy thud echoed from the ceiling above them, the floor of the library. Then came the sound of dragging, like furniture being moved. "They are searching for the passage entrance," Silas said. "We don't have much time. We have the proof," Isabel said, holding up the glass tube. "We just need to get this to the magistrate in Leeds. The magistrate is 20 miles away through a blizzard." Silas countered. "And Frederick has the stables." Then we fight, Isabel said. She picked up a scalpel from the dusty tray. It was small, pitiful against a gun, but her grip was firm. Silas looked at her, this woman who had frozen at his gates 3 days ago, now ready to go to war for him. He reached out and covered her hand with his large one. No, Silas said softly. You run. I fight. I am not leaving you, Isabel protested. You must, Silas insisted. There is a drainage tunnel that leads from this cellar to the riverbank. It will be frozen over. You can walk the ice to the village. Find the vicar. He is an honest man. Give him the tube. Tell him to send a rider to Leeds, and I am going to distract them, Silas said. He picked up the tin of gunpowder. I am going to give Frederick the welcome he deserves. Before she could argue, he grabbed her shoulders and pulled her close. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. The impulse was there. She saw it in his dark eyes, a flash of raw hunger. But he pulled back. Go, he commanded. Save the evidence. Save yourself. He pushed her toward the dark opening of the drainage tunnel. Isabel looked back once, seeing the lonely figure of the Iron Duke standing amidst the ruins of his father's dreams. Then she turned and ran into the dark. Silas waited until her footsteps faded. Then he lit the fuse of the crude bomb and walked toward the stairs. The explosion that rocked the west wing of Ashbourne Manor was not large enough to bring down the walls, but it was loud enough to wake the dead. Silas had timed it perfectly. He had thrown the gunpowder tin into the dumbwaiter shaft and hoisted it to the second floor, where Frederick's men were tearing apart his bedchamber. The blast blew the dumbwaiter doors off their hinges and filled the upper corridor with smoke and debris. Fire, someone screamed. The lunatic has set the house on fire. Silas emerged from the library panel, pistol raised. The element of surprise was his only advantage. The hall was filled with smoke. He saw a shape moving through the haze, one of the thugs. Silas pistol-whipped him before the man could raise his rifle. The man went down with a grunt. Silas didn't stop. He moved like a ghost, hunting. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to buy Isabel time. Every minute he kept them occupied was a minute she gained on the ice. Jameson, Silas roared, his voice echoing through the smoke. Where are you, you traitorous coward? A shot rang out, chipping the stone pillar next to Silas's head. He dove behind a heavy oak table. Give it up, your grace, Jameson's voice called out from the landing. It's over. Frederick has the deed ready. Just sign it and you can go to the asylum in peace. I'd rather rot in hell, Silas fired blindly over the table. Meanwhile, a mile away, Isabel was fighting a different battle. The drainage tunnel had been a nightmare of crawling through slime and ice, but the riverbank was worse. The wind was a physical weight, pushing her back. The river ooze was a jagged scar of black ice and white snow. She clutched the glass tube inside her dress, against her skin to keep it warm. If it shattered, Silas's life was over. She stumbled, her foot catching on a hidden root. She fell hard, her face slamming into the snow. The cold burned. She wanted to lie there. It would be so easy to just sleep. No, she forced herself up. She saw the lights of the village in the distance, tiny pinpricks of hope. Suddenly, a hand clamped over her mouth. Isabel tried to scream, but the sound was smothered by a leather glove. She was lifted off the ground, kicking and thrashing. "Got her," a rough voice grunted. The boss said, "Watch the river exits." Smart man, Lord Frederick. It was the second thug. He had anticipated the escape route. Isabel bit down hard on the leather glove. The man swore and dropped her, but before she could run, he backhanded her. The world spun. She fell onto the ice, the glass tube slipping from her dress. It skittered across the ice, shining in the moonlight. "Well, well," the thug said, walking over to it. He picked up the tube. "What do we have here?" "A little science experiment." "No," Isabel cried, reaching out. The man grinned and crushed the tube in his hand. The glass shattered. The silver mirror, the proof of the poison, flaked away into the snow. "Come on, darling," he sneered, grabbing her by the hair. "The party is back at the house. Back at the manor, the fight was over." Silas was on his knees in the center of the great hall. His pistol was empty. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, blinding him in one eye. Jameson stood over him, holding a shotgun. Frederick sat in a high-backed chair that had been dragged from the dining room, sipping a glass of Silas's best port. "Valiant effort, cousin," Frederick said, swirling the wine. "Truly." The explosion was a nice touch. "Very dramatic. You will never get away with this," Silas rasped. "The Crown will investigate. The Crown cares about order, not individuals," Frederick dismissed. "And when the local doctor, who I have paid quite handsomely, certifies that you died of a fit of madness induced by your condition, well, who is to argue?" The front doors swung open. A gust of snow blew into the hall, followed by the second thug dragging Isabel. Silas's heart stopped. "Found her by the river," the thug announced, throwing Isabel onto the floor at Silas's feet. "She had this on her." He tossed the shards of the glass tube onto the rug. "Isabel," Silas groaned. He reached for her, but Jameson kicked him in the ribs. Silas collapsed, gasping for air. Isabel crawled to him, ignoring the men's. She touched his face, wiping the blood from his eye. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I lost it. I lost the proof." "It doesn't matter," Silas whispered, looking at her with an intensity that ignored the guns pointed at them. "You are alive." Frederick stood up, clapping his hands slowly. "How touching." "The madman and the thief. A match made in hell." He walked over to them, looking down with pure contempt. "Jameson, lock them in the ice house," Frederick commanded. "It's fitting, don't you think?" She came from the cold. Let the cold take her back. "And let the Duke join her." "The ice house," Jameson hesitated. "Sir, that will take days." "Just shoot them." "No," Frederick smiled cruelly. "A bullet is suspicious." But two lovers, fleeing in a storm, losing their way and freezing to death. That is a tragedy. That is poetry. He leaned down, grabbing Isabel's chin. Goodbye, Miss Calloway. You should have kept running. The ice house was a stone structure built into the side of the hill, used to store blocks of ice cut from the river for the summer months. It was a windowless tomb, 10 degrees colder than the outside air. The heavy iron door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in the darkness. The bolt slid home. Silas and Isabel were alone in the pitch black. The floor was solid ice. The walls were damp stone. There was no way out. Silas slumped against the wall, his strength failing him. The poison in his blood, combined with the blow to his head, was taking its toll. Silas, Isabel's voice was small in the darkness. I am here, he murmured. He reached out, finding her hand. He pulled her close, wrapping his heavy coat around both of them. We are going to die here, Isabel said, her voice trembling. Perhaps, Silas said. He felt a strange sense of calm. The fighting was done. The secrets were out. But we are not dead yet. He pulled her into his lap, trying to share his body heat. Isabel, he said softly. I have spent 5 years pushing the world away. I thought I hated everyone. But these last few days, you made me remember what it is to be alive. You are not the Iron Duke, Isabel whispered, resting her head on his chest. You are just a man who was hurt. And you, Silas brushed a strand of hair from her face, though he couldn't see it. You are the bravest woman I have ever known. He leaned down, finding her lips in the dark. It was a cold kiss, tasting of blood and tears, but it ignited a fire between them that defied the ice. It was a kiss of desperation, of acknowledgement, of two broken souls fitting together perfectly. If we die, Silas whispered against her lips, I want you to know I would have married you. Scandal be damned, Isabel let out a choked sob. And I would have said yes. They held each other as the temperature dropped. Silas could feel his consciousness slipping. The poison was winning. The cold was winning. But then a sound. Not the wind. Not the groaning of the ice. A scraping sound. Metal on stone. From beneath them. Silas's eyes snapped open. He remembered. The ice house wasn't just a storage room. It was built over the old abbey foundations. Isabel, he hissed, shaking her awake. The floor. The drainage grate. What? She slurred, sleep claiming her. The ice blocks sit on a grate so the meltwater can drain away, Silas said, adrenaline spiking one last time. If we can lift the grate. There is a tunnel. It doesn't go to the river. It goes to the crypts. The crypts, the family tomb, Silas said. It has an exit to the churchyard. He fumbled in the dark, feeling for the iron ring of the grate. It was frozen shut. Help me, Silas grunted. Pull, they both gripped the iron rings. Silas roared, channeling every ounce of his remaining strength, fueled by the rage of a dying man. Isabel pulled until her fingers bled. With a crack like a gunshot, the ice sealing the grate gave way. The heavy iron grid lifted. Below them was a black hole, smelling of wet earth and ancient bones. "Go," sealers gasped. "Drop down." They slid into the hole, tumbling onto a pile of dirt 10 feet below. Above them, the ice house remained silent. Frederick thought they were freezing. He didn't know they had just entered the resting place of the Harringtons, and the dead were about to help the living take back their home. The crypt beneath Ashbourne Manor smelled of wet earth, iron, and the faint, sweet decay of old wreaths. It was a place of utter stillness, save for the ragged breathing of two people who had just cheated death. Sealers landed hard on his shoulder, groaning as pain shot through his arm. Isabel tumbled beside him, coughing as the dust of centuries rose around them. They were in the ossuary, the oldest part of the family tomb, where the bones of the first Harringtons were interred before the marble sarcophagi of the upper crypt were built. "Are you hurt?" Sealers rasped, feeling for her in the gloom. His hand found her arm, then her face. Her skin was freezing. "I think I twisted my ankle," Isabel whispered, her teeth chattering violently. "But I'm alive." Sealers pulled himself up, using a stone ledge for support. His head swam. The poison was still in his veins, a dull, throbbing ache that made his vision blur. But the adrenaline of the fall had bought him a few more minutes of clarity. "We have to move," he said, his voice echoing in the small chamber. "The cold down here is different. It creeps into the bone. If we stay, we sleep. If we sleep, we die. Where does this lead?" Isabel asked, trying to stand and wincing. "The old chapel ruins," Sealers explained, guiding her hand to his shoulder. "My great-grandfather sealed the entrance during the restoration, but the grate we just fell through was part of the original drainage system. There should be a maintenance tunnel that leads up to the vestry." They began to walk, stumbling over uneven stones. The tunnel was narrow, the ceiling low enough that Sealers had to stoop. It was a passage built for the dead, not the living. "Sealers," Isabel said after a few minutes of silence, her voice tight. "Why did Frederick do it? He is wealthy. He has his own estate. Why kill you for this?" Sealers paused, leaning against the damp wall to catch his breath. "Greed is a bottomless pit, Isabel. Frederick made bad investments in the railways. He leveraged everything he had on a line that was never built. He is ruined. He needs Ashbourne not for the title, but to sell it off piece by piece to cover his debts. He would destroy your legacy for money. He would burn the world for a shilling," Sealers corrected. "And he thinks he has won. He thinks we are freezing in the ice house." A strange sound echoed from the darkness ahead, a rhythmic thump, thump, thump. Sealers froze. "Did you hear that?" "It sounded like digging," Isabel whispered. They crept forward. The tunnel widened, revealing a faint, grey light filtering down from above. They had reached the end of the ossuary. Above them was the stone floor of the ruined chapel. And in the center of the chamber, illuminated by a lantern, was a man with a shovel. It wasn't Frederick. It wasn't Jameson. It was Dr. Alcott. The village physician. The man Silas had sent for when he first found Isabel. Silas stared in disbelief. Alcott was digging a shallow grave in the soft earth of the crypt floor. Beside him lay a canvas sack, heavy and still. "He's burying something," Isabel breathed. Silas stepped out of the shadows. "Dr. Alcott." The doctor spun around, dropping the shovel with a clang. His face went white with terror. "Your Grace, I thought you were dead," Silas finished, stepping into the lantern light. He looked like a revenant, covered in dirt, blood drying on his forehead, his eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. "Not yet, Doctor. But I see you are busy." Alcott fell to his knees. "I had no choice. He threatened my practice. He said he would ruin me." "Who, Lord Frederick?" Alcott sobbed. "He made me falsify the death certificates for the patients from St. Jude's," Isabel gasped. "The patients didn't disappear in London. They were brought here to the old hunting lodge," Alcott confessed, pointing a trembling finger north. "He used them for his experiments. When they died, he made me bury them here in the old crypts where no one would look. He said it was charity work." Silas looked at the canvas sack. "He didn't need to ask what was inside." "You helped him murder innocent people," Silas said, his voice trembling with rage. "I was afraid," Alcott cried. "He is a powerful man. He is a monster," Silas spat. "And so are you." He moved to grab the doctor, but Isabel put a hand on his chest. "Silas, wait. He is a witness." Silas looked at her. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt, but her eyes were clear. "We lost the blood sample," Isabel said. "But we have something better. We have the man who buried the bodies." Silas looked back at Alcott. "You are going to come with us, Doctor. And you are going to tell the magistrate everything." "I can't," Alcott stammered. "Frederick has men everywhere. The village is watched." "We aren't going to the village," Silas said, a grim smile forming on his lips. "We are going back to the house." "The house?" Isabel asked, confused. "But they are there." "Exactly," Silas said. "They are celebrating. They think they have won. They will be drunk. And they won't be expecting the dead to rise." He looked at the shovel. He picked it up, weighing it in his hands. It was heavy, iron-shod. A crude weapon, but effective. "Doctor," Silas said, "give me your medical bag." "My bag, yes. You have ether, do you not?" "I." "Yes, good," Silas said. "Isabel, can you make a sedative?" Isabel looked at the bag, then at Silas. She understood. "Strong enough to knock out a horse." "Then let's prepare a toast for my cousin," Silas said. The great hall of Ashbourne Manor was warm, lit by the roaring fire and the golden glow of chandeliers. Frederick Harrington sat at the head of the long dining table, his feet resting on the polished wood. Jameson poured him another glass of Silas's best vintage. "To family," Frederick toasted, raising his glass to the empty room. "And to the unfortunate accidents that befall them." The two thugs laughed, tearing into a roast chicken that Mrs. Gable had been forced to cook at gunpoint. The staff, Mrs. Gable, Pumblechook, and the maids, were locked in the pantry, their muffled cries ignored. "It's a shame about the girl," Jameson noted, sipping his wine. "She was pretty. Pretty things are often fragile," Frederick shrugged. "She shouldn't have played games with her betters." Outside, the storm had finally broken. The moon hung full and bright over the snow-covered moors. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the manor creaked open. The wind blew in, extinguishing the candles near the entrance. Frederick sat up, squinting into the gloom. "Who goes there?" "I told you to lock the doors, Jameson." "I did, sir," Jameson stammered, reaching for his shotgun. From the darkness, a figure emerged. It was Sealers. He walked slowly, his footsteps heavy on the stone floor. He was covered in grave dirt, his clothes torn, his face a mask of dried blood and stone dust. He looked like a corpse that had clawed its way out of the earth. Frederick dropped his glass. It shattered, spilling red wine across the table like blood. "Ghost," one of the thugs screamed, scrambling backward. "I am no ghost, cousin," Sealers said, his voice calm, echoing in the silent hall. "Though I have walked with them tonight." "Shoot him," Frederick shrieked. "Shoot him, you idiots." Jameson raised the shotgun, but his hands were shaking so badly he couldn't aim. "Wait," Sealers said, raising a hand. "Before you kill me. Again. You should check on your men outside." "What?" Frederick demanded. "The carriage driver. The guards by the stables. They seem tired." Frederick ran to the window. In the moonlight, he saw his men slumped over the carriage wheels, unmoving. "What did you do?" Frederick hissed, turning back to Sealers. "The doctor," Sealers said, nodding toward the kitchen door. Isabel stepped out, supporting Dr. Alcott. The doctor looked terrified, but he held a cloth soaked in ether. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," Sealers said, walking closer to the table. "So we decided to put them to sleep. We slipped the sedative into the ale barrel in the stables. Your men are very thirsty, you." Frederick sputtered. He grabbed a knife from the table. "I will kill you myself," he lunged at Sealers. Sealers didn't flinch. He sidestepped the clumsy thrust, grabbing Frederick's wrist. With a sickening crunch, he twisted it. Frederick screamed, dropping the knife. Sealers spun him around, pinning him against the table. He picked up the bottle of wine Frederick had been drinking. "You like poison, cousin," Sealers whispered in his ear. "Dr. Alcott tells me you prefer arsenic. Shall we see how it tastes?" He forced the bottle to Frederick's lips. "No. No," Frederick gurgled, thrashing. "I surrender." "I surrender? It isn't poison, you fool," Sealers said with disgust, slamming the bottle down. "I am not you." He shoved Frederick away. The man fell to the floor, weeping in pain and humiliation. "Jameson," Sealers said, turning to his valet. Jameson dropped the shotgun. He fell to his knees. "Your Grace, please. I had no choice. He promised me money. My mother is sick." "Get out," Sealers said quietly. "Sir, get out of my house. Leave Yorkshire. If I ever see your face again, I will not be so merciful." Jameson scrambled up and ran out into the night, not looking back. Sealers turned to the thugs. "And you, gentlemen, do you wish to join your friends in a nap?" The thugs looked at each other, then at the massive, furious Duke. They dropped their weapons and fled. Silence returned to Ashbourne Manor. Isabel walked over to Sealers. She reached out and touched his arm. He was trembling. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only exhaustion and the residual effects of the poison. "It is over," she whispered. Sealers looked at her. He looked at Frederick, sobbing on the floor. He looked at the portrait of his father above the fireplace. "Yes," Sealers said, his voice breaking. "It is finally over." He collapsed into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Isabel knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him, holding him as he finally allowed himself to feel the weight of 5 years of loneliness and fear dissolve. 3 months later, April 1848. The snow had melted from the moors, revealing the rolling green hills of Yorkshire. The air was filled with the scent of heather and wet earth. In the gardens of Ashbourne Manor, the fountains were flowing again. The windows were open, letting in the spring breeze. Sealers Harrington sat on a stone bench, watching a woman walk through the rose garden. She wore a simple blue dress, not a uniform. Her hair was loose, catching the sunlight. Isabel Calloway, soon to be Isabel Harrington, Duchess of Ashbourne. The trial had been the scandal of the decade. Dr. Alcott's testimony, combined with the exhumed bodies from the crypt, had sent Frederick to the gallows. The Iron Duke had been vindicated. But Sealers didn't care about the vindication. He cared about the woman who had saved him. He stood up and walked to her. She turned, smiling. Her face was fuller, her eyes bright. The shadows of St. Jude's were gone. "The vicar is asking about the date again," she said, teasing him. "He says the village is ready to riot if we don't announce it soon." "Let them riot," Sealers said, taking her hands. "I am not ready to share you yet. You have to share me with the patients," Isabel reminded him. "The new clinic opens next week," Sealers smiled. They had turned the East Wing, the very wing where she had been nursed back to health, into a free clinic for the villagers. No questions asked. No ledgers. Just care. "You are a stubborn woman, Isabel," Sealers said, pulling her close. "And you are a difficult man, Sealers," she replied, resting her forehead against his. "I was frozen," he whispered. "Until you found me." "No," Isabel said softly, kissing him. "We found each other." They stood in the garden, surrounded by the bloom of new life, 2 survivors who had walked through the winter and come out the other side, warm at last. And so the Iron Duke and the nurse proved that even the coldest hearts can be thawed by the fire of truth. History remembers Sealers Harrington not as the mad recluse, but as the man who reformed medical care in Yorkshire, all because of the woman who refused to let him die. If you enjoyed this story of mystery, romance, and justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What do you think? Would you have forgiven Jameson? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a tale from the archives. Until next time, keep the history alive.